The call to police came early in the morning. A man, speaking from abroad, calmly reported that a child's body could be found inside a house in Woking, a town in the county of Surrey located in the southeast of England. He gave the address, then hung up. When officers arrived, they found the girl alone, cold, lifeless, and bruised. She hadn't been seen at school in weeks. The family was gone. And as investigators looked closer, it became clear. This wasn't just a case of neglect. It was something far darker, something that had been hidden in plain sight for far too long. This is the case of Sara Sharif. Woking, Surrey isn't the kind of place you'd expect to make international headlines. It's a peaceful town with tree-lined roads, quiet neighborhoods, and a sense of safety that residents rarely question. That's what made the events of August 2023 so difficult to comprehend. At the center of it all was Sara Sharif, a bright and imaginative 10-year-old whose life ended inside her own home, a place that was supposed to be her refuge. On August 10th, 2023, Surrey police received a call that was anything but routine. It came from Islamabad, Pakistan. Sara's father, Irfan Sharif, had phoned 999 from abroad. His message was brief but devastating. His daughter was dead, and her body was inside their home in Woking. Responding immediately, officers arrived at the suburban property on Hammond Road. What they found confirmed the worst. Inside, they discovered 10-year-old Sara Sharif's lifeless body. What stood out immediately, according to early police reports, were the injuries. They weren't recent, and they weren't isolated. Investigators noted bruises, old fractures, and signs of prolonged mistreatment. This wasn't just a case of a child who had died suddenly. It was the picture of someone who had suffered over time. From the outside, the house appeared calm, unremarkable. There were no signs of a struggle or break-in. Neighbors were stunned, shaking their heads as officers moved in and out. Sara had lived there quietly with her father, stepmother, and several other children. To those who knew them casually, the Sharif household never raised concern. But behind those walls, something had gone terribly wrong. News of Sara's death sent shockwaves through the community. It wasn't just sorrow over the loss of a young life. It was the slow, dawning awareness that there had been warning signs. A local teacher, speaking anonymously, remembered Sara as a polite, observant child, though noticeably quiet. She rarely spoke about her home life, but the teacher recalled subtle behaviors that, in hindsight, hinted at something more. At the time, no one seriously considered that she might have been in danger. It just didn't seem like that kind of family, at least from the outside. That's what made the truth even harder to accept. Social services later confirmed that Sara wasn't entirely unknown to them, though officials kept details limited. Still, the autopsy left little room for doubt. The injuries she sustained didn't come from one moment. They built up over time. Just hours after Sara's body was found, her father, 41-year-old Irfan Sharif, his partner, Bainash Batul, and his brother, Faisal Malik, were already gone from the country. It would later come to light that the three had boarded a last-minute flight to Pakistan the night before, taking 5 of the family's other children with them. While Sara lay dead in the house on Hammond Road, her guardians were already in the air, halfway across the world. Before we talk about what happened to Sara and why her lifeless body was found alone in that house, we need to understand the man who called himself her father. It begins with Irfan Sharif, a young man from Pakistan who arrived in Woking, England, at just 18 years old back in the year 2000. Securing a visa had been a challenge, but once in the UK, he found steady work and a decent income, enough to support himself and send money back home. For Irfan, that was a success, but it wasn't enough. He wanted something more permanent. And he believed the fastest path to that was marriage. At the time, he was working as a taxi driver, and between shifts, he started seeking out a woman who could help him secure citizenship through marriage. That's when he met Angelika, a Polish woman. What began as a supposed partnership soon turned into something far more sinister. Irfan grew controlling, violent. He held Angelica captive in his flat, once even threatening her with a knife. She eventually escaped by climbing out a window and went straight to the police. Irfan was arrested, but only detained for 2 days. By 2009, Irfan had moved on, or rather continued his pattern. He met another Polish woman named Olga Domin, reportedly while stalking Angelica in her hometown. This time, he promised love, stability, a future. For Olga, who was new to the country and navigating life on her own, his offer seemed comforting. They married within months. At first, it seemed like a fresh start, but the cycle repeated. Irfan's charm turned into control. The abuse returned. Their first child, a son, was born in 2010. But the violence didn't stop. Just a year after their marriage, Irfan was arrested again, this time for beating both Olga and the child. Olga later told social services he had locked her in a room, taken her phone, and wrapped a belt around her neck. She lived in a constant state of fear, trapped in a volatile household where financial stress and aggression fed off each other. Still, for the sake of their child, Olga tried to hold the family together. In 2013, they had a daughter, Sara. Olga hoped the birth would bring peace, a new beginning, but that hope quickly faded. Sara was placed under a child protection plan immediately after she was born because both of her parents were considered risks. It's a heartbreaking reality. From the moment she entered the world, Sara wasn't being sheltered by the people who should have protected her. She was being protected from them. At some point during their fractured marriage, Olga discovered that Irfan had been having an affair with a woman named Baynesh Batul. For Olga, this betrayal wasn't just the final straw, it was a lifeline. She used it as the reason she needed to finally leave him. The separation came in 2015, followed by a divorce. At first, the children stayed with Olga, but in 2019, something changed. Custody was granted to Irfan. From that point on, the children lived in Woking with their father and his new partner, Baynesh, the same woman from the affair. Irfan claimed he had changed, that he would take care of the children properly, that things would be different. They weren't. Sara, in particular, became the target of cruel treatment. She was forced to carry out domestic chores for the couple, who often berated her and lashed out both verbally and physically. Punishments escalated into disturbing acts. The children were bound with tape, their heads covered with makeshift hoods crafted from foil and duct tape. Mistakes, any mistakes, were met with severe beatings. Sometimes they worked until they collapsed from exhaustion. The screams were loud enough that neighbors heard them, but somehow nothing stopped. Sara began to change. The bright little girl slowly faded into a quiet, withdrawn shadow of herself. She still went to school, dressed in a hijab and long sleeves, but her injuries couldn't be fully hidden. Teachers noticed the bruises. They noticed her eyes. They asked questions. Sara, perhaps afraid or coached, gave excuses. She explained away the pain. But the concerns mounted, and the school alerted social services. Still, no intervention came that made a difference. In April 2023, Irfan made a decision that would further seal their fate. He pulled the children out of school, claiming they would be homeschooled. From that moment on, Sara and her siblings were completely isolated. No teachers, no outsiders, no safe spaces. It was the beginning of a nightmare with no exits. The abuse didn't stop, it intensified, and there was no one left to witness it. Then, in early August, a message was sent. Sara's older brother texted a friend, "My sister died. I don't know what to do." No one came. On the 9th of August, a call came into the UK's emergency services, which was from Pakistan. Sara Sharif, on the line, confessed in a flat, distant voice. He said he was a terrible father, that he had killed his daughter, that he didn't mean to, but got carried away while punishing her. But Sara was already gone. When police arrived at the family's home in Woking, they found her body lying still on the floor, and the house was empty. Sara died there on the cold floor of the very house where she was meant to be safe. Her small body bore the evidence of every wound she had endured. Near her was a note, reportedly from Irfan. It repeated the same excuse he gave on the phone, but no excuse could ever make sense of what was done. On August 15, 2023, a post-mortem was conducted on Sara's small, battered body. What it revealed was almost unbearable. The report found that she had suffered severe, prolonged abuse, 11 fractures in her spine, injuries caused not by a single blow, but by repeated, relentless blunt force trauma. A puncture wound to the head, traumatic brain injury, a burn on her buttock believed to be from a domestic iron, scalds from hot water, bruises from beatings with various objects, restraint marks, and horrifyingly, human bite marks. These were not accidental injuries. They were the marks of calculated cruelty, the kind of violence that builds over time, hidden behind closed doors, until the damage is irreversible. Soon, the 3 adults were officially named persons of interest. Surveillance footage from Heathrow confirmed what many feared. Irfan, Beinash, and Faisal were seen at the airport, calmly passing through security with 5 children in tow. Whatever had happened to Sara, this wasn't a family in mourning. This was a calculated exit. In response, authorities launched an international manhunt. In the letter left behind, Irfan admitted that he had planned the escape with his wife, Beinash, and his brother Faisal. He claimed they fled out of fear, but what truly disgusted the public was the way he tried to twist the narrative, positioning himself as a broken father, not a killer. He said he loved Sara, that it was all a mistake. He pleaded with officials to bury her according to Islamic tradition, claiming it was what she would have wanted. As if that could somehow make up for the horrors she endured. He even said he would turn himself in when he was ready. But the authorities weren't waiting. On the ground of Pakistan, police began what would be a highly publicized search. Raids were carried out across Jhelum, the family's home region, with a focus on properties connected to Irfan's extended relatives. During one operation, the 5 children who had been brought from the UK were found at the home of Irfan's father. They were unharmed, but placed in the care of a local children's welfare organization. Meanwhile, of the adults, there was no trace. Exactly 5 weeks after their abrupt departure, the situation took an unexpected turn. On September 13, 2023, Irfan, Beinash, and Faisal boarded a flight back to the UK voluntarily. Why? After weeks of evasion, did they return? Some speculated that their decision stemmed from mounting pressure, both from international authorities and potentially from those aiding their escape. Others questioned whether they had hoped returning voluntarily might improve their standing in the courts. And they were immediately arrested. On September 19th, the 3 adults appeared via video link at the Central Criminal Court of England and Wales. All of them pleaded not guilty. More hearings followed, more statements, and still they stuck to the same hollow defense. It was never meant to happen. In March 2024, the trial began, and there, in court, the world saw what little remorse they had left. Irfan, in particular, continued to make the case about himself. At first, Sara Sharif tried to shift responsibility, claiming that it was his wife, Beinash Batul, who was primarily at fault. But later, he admitted to beating Sara, even confessing that he used a cricket bat in the attacks. He described how hurt he was, as if he hadn't crushed the life out of his own daughter, as if he were the victim. The jury heard how Sara had once called him the cruelest parent on earth, how she feared him, how she suffered under him. Beinash Batul and Faisal Malik chose not to testify during the trial, declining the chance to explain their roles or defend their actions. Prosecutors argued that even if they had not dealt the fatal injuries, their complicity in Sara's abuse and neglect was undeniable. And finally, on December 11, 2024, justice in some form was delivered. Sara Sharif and Beinash Batul were found guilty of murder, held directly responsible for Sara's death. Faisal Malik, who had stood by and done nothing, was convicted of causing or allowing the death of a child. The sentencing came quickly. Irfan was given life in prison with a minimum term of 40 years. Beinash received life as well, with at least 33 years to serve. Faisal was sentenced to 16 years. When the judge delivered the sentence, his words were sharp and unsparing. He called the abuse a campaign of torture and described Sara's treatment as nothing short of despicable. Not long after he was sent down, Irfan was attacked in prison. Another inmate slashed his face and neck with the jagged lid of a tuna can. The injuries weren't life-threatening, but they sent a message. Even inside, away from the public eye, the anger surrounding Sara's death hadn't faded. Around the same time, the Solicitor General pushed for a harsher sentence, while Irfan and Beinash appealed for leniency. But in January 2025, the Court of Appeal upheld the original terms. There would be no second chance. In the months after Sara's death, the outrage didn't fade. It deepened. People began asking how so many warning signs had been missed. In Parliament, MP Will Forster introduced what he called Sara's Law, a proposal to close the gaps that let her fall through. It would give schools better access to information about vulnerable children and make them official partners in local safeguarding efforts. At the same time, England's Children's Commissioner, Rachel de Souza, called for sweeping reforms, title rules on homeschooling, a register for children not in school, and an end to the legal defense of reasonable punishment. These weren't just policy tweaks, they were responses to a system that had failed a little girl in every possible way. And for many, they held the hope that Sara's story wouldn't just end in tragedy, but in change. Still, for all the outrage and momentum, Sara's death felt painfully close to home because it wasn't just about one child, one family, or one failure. It exposed something quieter, but just as dangerous. The small ways signs were missed, concerns dismissed, and responsibilities passed along. Her killers now sit behind bars, and Sara's Law may one day help prevent another tragedy. But a harder truth lingers. There are still children like her, invisible in plain sight. And until we stop assuming someone else will step in, until every part of the system is ready to act, Sara's story will remain a reflection of what happens when no one truly sees a child in danger. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.